An extract from the Jersey Occupation Diary by Nan Le Ruez. May the 9th, 1945. Liberation Day. At last. 11 a.m. The sun is coming out, though there are plenty clouds about yet. I was so tired yesterday that I've slept very well. Joan has phoned to say she can see one British ship in St. Juan's Bay. No planes have come yet. I expect the Germans were not prepared for surrender. Constable Duval told Francis that 11 o'clock yesterday morning they were still talking about fighting. It is hard for them to surrender. Later. It has been such an exciting day and so wonderful. The British Tommies have arrived at last. And I realise how very, very thankful we must be to God that we have been freed without bloodshed. It is a miracle, and God's doing. The Commandant of the Channel Islands was still refusing all day yesterday to surrender, and it was only at the very last minute that he gave in, 1 minute after midnight. We were wondering what was the best time to go to town, when, at about 1:40 p.m, we heard the sound of planes. We rushed out, and there were British planes roaring past quite low. At that moment, for the first time, I really began to feel excited. The British have come at last, I thought. We waved, and I'm sure that the pilots saw us and our Union Jacks flying from several places. The planes did not land, but roared overhead several times during the day and evening, throwing out coloured lights. In town, how people cheered and cheered them as they passed over. This was our first sign of the arrival of the British. Joyce, Joan Sivray, Herbert and I rushed off to town on our bicycles, whilst the others, not poor mother though, went in Mr. Vibert's lorry. We had all heard that there was going to be a ceremony in the Royal Square as soon as the British Commission had landed, so we left our cycles at Mr. Morant's office and made straight for the square. We went into an office and sat near a window and waited expectantly. The square was crowded. We waited, and nothing happened. By and by, we learnt that we had missed everything. The British officers had landed from the destroyer, arriving in the harbour in a small boat. Our bailiff, with the German commandant and his staff, had gone out to the destroyer in a small boat to sign the surrender, and had been given a tremendous welcome by the crowd that had gathered on the pier and weighbridge. Then a British officer had made a lovely speech from the balcony of the Pomme d'Or, said how proud they were to release us, how splendid we had been to stick it for 5 years, and how they did not come before because it would have meant bombing us to smithereens. Only a few men were with him, but he said others were coming. So we heard about it all from the girls who were lucky enough to go to the right place. We'd been in the square for 3 hours, all to no purpose. We were disappointed. In Hill Street, we saw a crowd of boys and girls mobbing a jerry bag. They ran after her like mad. I don't know if they caught her. We were told that she was trying to shake hands with a Tommy when someone recognised her as a friend of the Jerrys and began hitting her with an umbrella. I expect there will be many more such incidents. We went to have tea at Montpellier and came back to town hoping to be more fortunate. We saw Kath, Leslie and Margaret, who had come in the lorry, but unfortunately we lost them when we went to put away our bicycles. There was such a crowd on the piers and weighbridge. We did not know exactly where to go to see anything. We must have been guided to the right spot, for we went along to the North Pier, and just as we got near the cranes, there was a British boat just arriving and crowded with British Tommies, our first sight of them. Tears of joy and emotion welled up in our eyes. The crowd was terrific, but I managed to stand several inches higher on the bottom of a crane and had a lovely view. How we cheered and cheered. The soldiers started landing immediately, and as they passed, in single file through the crowds, all who could manage it shook them by the hand and said how pleased we were to see them. I shook hands with many, and how we all smiled. The soldiers kissed the children and gave out sweets, chocolate, and cigarettes. How wonderful to be there. I'll never forget. We stood alongside the boat, and many people crowded onto it and chatted to the soldiers. One started calling out for the boys from Lemoy. I felt so thankful for their mother's sake. Don, Ed, and Jim LeButelier were all safe. Then I realised that the soldier who was shouting out the good news was a Jerseyman I knew, John Fiat. I saw one soldier sitting happily with his arms around 4 girls of different ages. Reunited. Must have been their father. Joan was very keen to speak to one of the naval officers that we could see down on the boat. She so wanted to find out if he had any news of her father. Then the officer came off the boat, and Joan asked me to ask him for her. So I plucked up courage and asked him if he knew Captain Sivray, and explained about Joan. How charming he was, and such a handsome young man too, with lovely teeth. He stopped at once, but said he did not know Captain Sivray. He told us he wanted to look at a German boat that was lying nearby, hoping to get a Nazi flag to put under his Union Jack. As he stood looking at the German boat, the German sailors were still sitting about on it playing cards. We went back to ask his name. He told us it was Cooper, and that he came from Blackpool. Then we had a lovely long conversation with him. How kind of him to speak to us for so long, just to us 4. He told us many interesting things, that the German in command of the Channel Islands would not surrender. On Victory Day he had not surrendered. This officer and his men were waiting at Plymouth and wondered why they could not leave before. I realise again that only by a miracle have we been saved from terrible things. I asked him what would have happened if the commandant had refused to give in, and he said we would have been bombed and shelled with heavy guns. He told us his ship was an assault boat, such as they used to invade, to smash defences and land troops. He said the Germans were no good as sailors, and that often British ships had come, especially one naval officer called Higgins, or Higginson anyway, a man with the DSO several times over. An amazing fellow, he told us, near to the Channel Islands, at times only 5 miles off the Jersey coast, to try and draw the German ships out to sea. But they never succeeded. However, they enjoyed their little game with the Germans and caused them confusion. He asked if we heard the shore batteries when the Germans shot at them. I should think we did. We wondered what was happening. Now we know. He told us about the horrors in German camps. This has obviously made him dislike the Germans intensely. He wanted to know when we knew that the Germans had surrendered, and how we knew. Did they suddenly lay down all their arms? We told him we didn't know it for certain until just then, when the British had landed. He hoped to stay in Jersey for a month, but he expected to have to leave immediately. He had never been to Jersey, though he knew it well on his chart. He amused me when he asked our opinion of the Americans, not realising that we just had a few prisoners here and had not spoken to them. He said the Americans had stolen all their girls. He is not married, so he told us, because he cannot love his ship and a wife then. He has been away so long, and with such short leaves. I can't think why he spoke to us for so long, we insignificant beings in all that crowd. And when we shook hands, he held mine tightly and put his other one over it. I expect he was touched to see the joy in everybody's eyes and to realise what this day meant to us all. Joan was so thrilled and could have stayed near that boat forever, I think. I was so glad, for her sake, that we had been so fortunate to arrive in time, and she was so pleased that this sailor spoke to us. She is so interested in naval men and ships because of her father, whom I fervently hope is safe and well. I'm glad, for her sake, that I dared speak to this naval officer. Well, we stayed so long on the pier that we only got home at 11 p.m. But, Herbert being with us, it was all right, and there were no disturbances or wild excitement anywhere. It is really surprising. but one has trouble to take in the fact of release and freedom. It is so strange, with the Germans still about everywhere, unarmed, of course, looking on, mostly silently and grimly. Ah, they are no longer arrogant and swaggering. The weather has been cloudy and mostly dull, and very warm, with a lovely sky tonight. Fireworks here and there. Alice was here today. She told us that a farmer who had dealt with the Germans had been trying to get a turn at ringing the St. One's church bells, but P's father had refused to allow it, and they nearly fought over it. I suppose the jerry bags and others who have traded with the Germans are not feeling as happy as other people today. Well, how much there is to thank God for tonight. By the time we had chatted over the day's events with Dad and Mother, had supper and washed up, it was very late, and past 1 a.m. before I finally got into bed. All my life I will remember one of the first things Naval Officer Cooper said. It was what I liked best of all in the whole of our conversation. He said, "I have never yet been so touched as today. I've been there at the liberation of other countries in West Europe, but I've not been so very touched as today in liberating my own people. It is a privilege to be the first to come. We all wanted to be first." He said this so sincerely. It is lovely of them to talk of liberating us as a privilege. What a wonderful day! But how much more wonderful will the day be when I see my Alfred again? That is what I live and long for.